Hello and welcome to earlymusicsources.com. My name is Elam Rotem, and today, with the help of Doron, Giovanna and Jacob, we'll share with you the experience of reading madrigals from their original partbooks. Throughout the years, it has become standard for singers to use scores when reading music. However, in earlier times, this was most often not the case, and singers would read out of separate parts, each having only their own to read from. In this episode, I invite you to join a rehearsal of my group Profeti della Quinta, while we read madrigals by Philippe Verdelot using the original partbooks. We'll see how it's done, what the difficulties are, and most interestingly, what implications partbook reading has on performance. At the end, we'll sing a complete madrigal for you. Let's start. The collection we will read from is a compilation of Philippe Verdelot's 2 books of 4-part madrigals. Verdelot moved to Italy from France early in his career and is considered to be one of the first composers of the Italian madrigal genre, as well as a key developer of the concept of madrigalism, or word painting. In order to read from these parts, it is taken for granted that one is able to read Renaissance mensural notation. Apart from the fact that there are no bar lines, it is not so different from modern notation. Perhaps we'll look into it in another episode, but for now you can use this cheat sheet, and if something is not clear, you can check out the Wikipedia article about it. It is also taken for granted that one is able to read Italian. To start with, the readers have to establish 2 basic things: on what notes to start and how to count, or in other words, pitch and tactus. Since each person has only their own part and it is not a poker game, when reading something for the first time there must be a bit of sharing to see who starts. Reading the first madrigal in the collection, Sigliete grata morte, we start. So, who starts on this one?
I do.
So do I.
Yep, me too.
Yeah, me too, on a D. So, if I give them a note and say it's D, they should be able to find their note. The way of getting a pitch in earlier times was dependent on the context. If you sang along with instruments, naturally, you'd get the note from them. But when singing a cappella in church, for example, where an organ was taking part in the service, it would often play a little intonation before the vocal piece, so the singers would know on which note to start. However, in the Sistine Chapel, for example, where no instruments were allowed whatsoever, there is evidence that the oldest singer of the voice which started first was in charge of somehow giving the pitch. And if he gave a pitch that made the performance too low or too high for some of the singers, he had to pay a fine. This is just to say that unless there is a need to match the sung pitch with other instruments, the pitch is really up to the performers and is dependent on the ranges of their voices. So I'll give a pitch which is comfortable for us and everyone will have their note. This was pitch. Now we need the tactus. Tactus is first and foremost a synchronization aid. With everyone beating the same tactus, the parts stay locked together. Without it, and especially if there are many rests, it is extremely easy to get lost when reading from parts. In later madrigals, the tactus was most often on the semi-breve, but in these, it is in most cases on the breve, alla breve, so that each movement of the hand is of a semi-breve. Tac-tus, tac-tus. In this case, it is also in agreement with the mensural sign of the piece, but as we mentioned in our episode about tactus, relying on signs to determine the tactus does not always work. Check this video if you need to refresh your memory. By the way, the actual speed of the tactus is another subject altogether that we won't touch on this occasion. Now, let's try to beat the tactus on the breve and sing the beginning of this madrigal.
Sigliete grata morte.
This was rather easy, as all the voices started together and proceeded more or less together. Let's see how it would be in the piece Trista Marilli Mia. So I don't start in this one.
I rest.
I don't start either.
I start on an A.
So we'll get an A for Giovanna and sing it now, but I'll have you count with me until my entrance, so you'll see how important it is to count. When using modern scores and not parts, the readers may simply follow the other voices with their eyes in order to find their entrance, both when to enter and on what note. In the case of parts, this is not possible. The readers must use their ears and count and listen very well in order to enter correctly. It should be noted that in non-vocal fields nowadays, in orchestras for example, parts are used. But this is rather different, as there are bar lines, other signs, and most often a conductor. Going back to our old vocal part books, now that we have established how to start and how to count, we can move on to the next part. How to deal with things that are written in a certain way but are meant to be performed in another. If you have never heard the term MUSICA FICTA, please check out our video about it. From the narrow point of view of the singer, MUSICA FICTA means that in performance, some of the written notes are expected to be altered with accidentals. Some of these alterations were completely obligatory, and others more a matter of taste. What we are interested in at the moment is how the singers, having only their own part, can know whether to apply MUSICA FICTA. And this should be done, of course, without the help of any score edition or a musicologist. Let's take this example, the second musical phrase of Siliete grata morte. We'll sing it slowly, exactly as it is in the parts.
What happened on chord? This was funny.
You sang an E natural and I have written out E flat there on chord.
Oops.
In fact, if I had followed the rule we mentioned in the episode about MUSICA FICTA, Fa super La, this mistake would have been prevented, as I would have sang this E as a Fa, that is, with a flat. La, Fa, Sol, La, Re. It seems that the composer counted on the bass singer to apply this rule, while for the alto he wrote a flat explicitly, as otherwise there would be no reason to add one there. Other places that often call for MUSICA FICTA alterations are cadences. On the penultima, between the tenorizans and cantizans, there must be an interval of a major 6, and on the final note of the cadence, there must be a major harmony. If the written parts do not follow these, the singers must make it so by applying MUSICA FICTA. In authentic cadences, in order to achieve a major 6 between the tenorizans and cantizans, the cantizans often needs to become a Mi, be sharpened. In tenor cadences, however, one needs to choose whether to alter the cantizans into a Mi or the tenorizans into a Fa, as both results in the desired major 6 interval. It is often unclear which to choose, and the fact that the singers don't have a score and cannot see the context and the other voices makes it even more challenging. Let's have a look at this other phrase from Siliete grata morte.
This was funny.
I sang a ficta on the last note.
And I sharpened my C because I had a cantizans.
And I sang Fa super La.
So, based on legitimate reasoning, Giovanna added a sharp to the C and I added a flat to the E. But this resulted in an augmented 6th, not a welcome interval in this music. In order to achieve the desired major 6 in a cadence, only one of the parts should apply MUSICA FICTA. In this case, we would probably choose to have it only in the bass, as it also prevents a bad melodic interval. Other moments that are not always clear are final notes of cadences. At the very end of a piece it's clear, but in the middle of a piece, not always. In short, as you see, when reading from parts, ficta conflicts are bound to happen. Thus, while singing, the singers must be very attentive to the resulting progressions. Often, their alterations will work, but sometimes not. If they are very quick, they may realize what is happening and change their alterations on the fly. If not, a clash will happen, and they will note it in their memory for the next time. Other ficta additions, which are not directly connected with the rules we mentioned, were also added by musicians, but those were more a matter of personal taste. In the episode about MUSICA FICTA, we showed how some of Verdelot's madrigals were adapted to lute, and how in the process many ficta alterations were added. This is typical for such arrangements, but does not necessarily imply what singers did when singing, having only their own part and without concrete reasoning for so many alterations. Otherwise, note that Verdelot's madrigals, being from rather early in the 16th century, have very few written accidentals, and there are thus many points where it is debatable which ficta are necessary. But with time, it became more and more customary to write most of the necessary accidentals in the parts, leaving, thankfully, less room for debate.
As you see, reading from parts is quite challenging. Here are some more difficulties.
Clefs. Each singer has to be fluent in different clefs. For example, in my alto part alone, 3 different clefs are used: C3, C4, and C5.
Text underlay. Sometimes the text is not complete, and singers have to underlay the text themselves.
Mistakes. Often, there were mistakes in the parts. In the event of a mistake, singers were expected to recognize it and find their way back to the right place as quickly as possible.
You might ask yourself, why then should one read from parts? What is it good for? So, apart from the fact that this is simply how it was done in earlier times, there are some interesting ways in which reading from part books affects how we deal with this music, both conceptually and practically. Before singing for you, we'll go through these points.
1. Time. The fact that singers had to constantly count, and from a very young age, made their sense of time very strong. Modern musicians who can rely on their eyes and conductor to count and find their entrance are often less stable in that regard. Greater stability can also bring greater freedom. 2. Hearing. Since you can't see the music, you must develop better musical hearing. Which cadence happened just now? Should I add a ficta or not? Am I singing the phrase alone, or is everyone singing together? All of these questions must be answered and registered on the spot, relying solely on the sense of hearing. 3. Memory. Interestingly, in historical part books there are generally no markings. Singers did not write anything in them. This is probably due to their high value. So, once singers noted something about the piece, be it a certain ficta, a mistake, anything, they didn't write it down. Instead, they had to memorize it. 4. Bigger picture. Since parts are rather economic in space in comparison to scores, pieces can typically fit on one single page. This allows for their performers to grasp the entirety of the piece, or a very large portion of it, in one glance: the text, the music, and the form as a whole. This is almost never the case when scores are concerned. 5. Talking about music. Since there are no bars and no bar numbers, it is very hard to refer to specific points in the music.
For example, it is not possible to refer to bar 54. One must refer to where we sing the word gioia, or this tenor cadence we just sang before stopping. This makes the discussion about the music and its interpretation very different than it is with a score. Another example, you cannot suggest making a crescendo from bar 6 to bar 9. Whatever you suggest must be in connection to either the notes or text. It cannot be superimposed on it otherwise. The same is true also for changes in TACTUS. Without a conductor, it is possible to do so only in certain places and with much practice. In short, intricate and expressive interpretations are very much possible using parts, but are probably different from those that might originate from a score perspective.
Note that most of the things we discussed in this episode were concerning technical basic things that are needed to simply have the right notes at the right time. We haven't touched at all on things one may do in order to perform these pieces nicely, with the correct pronunciation and flow of the text, with added ornaments and many other things. So before finishing, we'll sing for you Verdelot's madrigal Ogn'hor per voi sospiro. This was our show about singing from Partbooks. We hope you enjoyed it, and that perhaps it gives you and your colleagues some inspiration to try it yourselves. It is easier than it looks. Many thanks to my friends at Profeti della Quinta, Doron, Giovanna and Jacob. Don't forget to check the special page on our website with all the footnotes and other extra information. If you enjoy early music sources, please feel free to support us on Patreon. Comment, share and like. See you next time at earlymusicsources.com.
I sang a Fichte on the last note.
And I sharpened my C because I had a Cantizans.
And I sang Fa super la. Good.
And I'm Jacob!